Cool. So hopefully you can all hear me. If someone can give me a thumbs up. Cool. So yeah, fantastic. So I'll kick off. So I'm here to talk about the war on PDFs, and I'm just going to cover a quick recap on PDFs. You know, why they're here and what sort of future I guess they have. So is there a war on PDFs? So it all started as you can tell, I'm from London, UK, hence my accent, but it all started one December evening where I changed a nappy, went for a run, came home, turned on the iPad and basically saw a tweet that made me think. It was by an official at Government Digital Services in the UK, and basically, he said that the war on PDF being a primary format on gov.uk is finally over. So it just made me think. Obviously, at CyberDuck, we're a digital agency. We have to deal with PDFs on a regular basis. So it prompted me to write an article that it's not really the death of the PDF, but it's still great news for accessibility. So in this talk today, I'm exploring this kind of whole notion. Just a few words about CyberDuck. So we're a global digital agency, and we're focused primarily on digital transformation through inclusive design, UX, and obviously Drupal. So Drupal is clearly a big thing for us. Otherwise, we wouldn't be here today. Just a couple of stats on the agency below. But yeah, 1 billion people today live with a disability. That makes 15% of the global population living with some type of disability. Now, they could include temporary disabilities. What we probably don't know is how many unreported cases of disabilities there are. And there's also something called invisible disability. So even if someone is disabled, we may not even know that. So it roughly makes that 1 in 5 people in the UK have some sort of form of disability, and 1 in 4 people in the US have some type of disability as well. So are we moving towards a more accessible internet? So first of all, no other invention has really been more pivotal to humankind since Gutenberg's printing press in the 1400s. So the world can definitely be at your fingertips if you can use a mouse and obviously see the screen. And the issue is not everybody can. Saying that, the internet is one of the best things that has ever happened to disabled people or people with disabilities. I just want to play a quick video from 2007 that shows what an accessible internet can do to people.
David Morris is the Senior Policy Advisor of the Greater London Authority, advising the London's Mayor on accessibility issues. He has spinal muscular atrophy and uses a number of technologies to get on with his busy schedule. But his favourite one is voice recognition, accompanied with a Bluetooth headset. He's been using speech recognition software for almost 10 years and currently uses Dragon Naturally Speaking.
Voice-activated software enables me to actually compete on an equal basis. In fact, probably gives me an advantage because those people who are smart know that voice-activated software has reached a point now where it's very functional.
Speech recognition software generally needs a bit of training before it can be used, which puts most people off. But the recently released Dragon Naturally Speaking version 9 claims that it's overcome that hurdle and now can be used straight out of the box. The BlackBerry is another bit of kit that David has in his bag. Although he likes the great functions, he believes the design could be improved for many people, disabled and left-handed.
For the first time in a long time, I can access a keyboard, but it's also really inaccessible to me as a one-handed, left-handed person with a stupid jog wheel, which is really difficult to use. So I have to turn it upside down, and it's so a strange way of accessing emails, but it's still very important.
The BlackBerry, who remembers that, huh? Wow, memories. But anyway, there's a variety of situational impairments as well. So it's not permanent disabilities, but situational. So when I, for example, had a baby, I had a sort of a situational motor impairment where, you know, I was essentially holding a baby in one hand constantly. My wife was doing a lot of traveling and literally had to use a laptop and a mobile phone. Equally, like if you know, one of our parents has a cataract removal, then they'll have sight issues, and all of a sudden, you know, they'll have the same problems that low vision users have. So it's all kind of relative, and we just need to be aware of these situational impairments that exist. So how does this how does this fit into my world and this whole kind of accessibility and PDF topic? So this is our client, Sport England. Cyberduct has helped them to re-platform and rework their content on a Drupal CMS. They have obviously thousands of pages and other websites we had to migrate. So it was a migration project, and they also have hundreds of PDFs as well. And as part of obviously working with them, we pulled in users with disabilities to basically look at their experience. So this is the real deal, and it's kind of ongoing work that we're doing with them. And in this particular user test, the PDFs are accessible, but they're a lot more fiddly. It's also important to mention that these PDFs that we're looking at in this particular test are before they've been optimized. So one of the jobs that we have at the moment is to help Sport England improve some of their PDFs, because they will probably keep some of them, but we can improve them, and that's what we're doing. But in these particular older PDFs, the keyboard shortcuts are not working. The blind users don't have that familiarity with the document, unlike HTML, where they can move around at greater ease. So PDFs should really have a table of content at the beginning that are available. PDFs can remember the last page, which is good for sort of long form content. But in HTML, they can also have links that help them with heading tabs to quickly navigate through the document. So I just wanted to show you a really quick video. Now, what you'll see here is a blind user talking about his experience viewing a PDF on a smartphone. So if he's using Apple VoiceOver.
Of course, this is very fast version.
Not going back to where we were before. As we recover together, we want to come back more inclusive and more relevant. Despite more than 100,000 organizations nationwide delivering a wide range of sport and physical activity offers, many people and communities still feel excluded, often unconsciously but sometimes not. When this happens at a grassroots level, it also means our talent pathways and national teams don't represent our nation's diversity. We need, together, to call this out and change this inequality. Alongside the challenge of inequality, and perhaps because of it, many sports and activities are in long-term decline. All activity matters, but for tens of millions of people, being active depends on organized sport and physical activity. By organized, we mean arranged by people. It could be anything from an exercise class or a lead walking group, through to a partner or a Sunday league football game, offered by a huge network. They're the beating heart of communities.
Just to summarize, the PDF on the mobile is the hardest in terms of accessibility, the least smooth. Then a PDF on a desktop, then the smoothest experience of all of them is an HTML on a desktop.
And he's a very smart guy, very sort of technically savvy with computers. He can talk at ease at, like, you know, W3C, WCAG standards. So he knows a lot about accessibility. And just move on here. So the results from this particular test is as per what the user said, is HTML offered the best particular experience. He scored that 9 stars out of 10, or 9.5. Mobile on HTML was kind of the second best experience, with the desktop kind of PDF being okay. I mean, he did complain about, you know, navigation through the document wasn't good, and mobile was definitely the worst experience for him. So are PDFs and the web broken? So before we answer that question, let's look at why the PDF was invented. It was basically invented as a way to send documents. I mean, we all probably remember this in the late 90s, where you would get an attachment and you just couldn't open it because you didn't have the right software or plugin. So it was kind of created as a universal format to create that element of portability, that anybody can open a document anywhere. And in an interview, the founder of co-founder of Adobe, John Warnock, who invented the PDF, said that HTML, you know, is a joke, and they've spent 20 years trying to fix it. So clearly there's a bit of a, you know, conflict going on there between, you know, the inventor of the PDF and HTML. But why do PDFs exist? They're a universal standard for consistent print design. They're a standardized format recognized by governments and officials all over the world, that they're portable, they're easy to send, to save and read offline, and arguably archive as well. And it's also a good format if you have sort of pieces of paper that you need to scan and sort of digitize. It uses something called OCR technology. And also it's a very low barrier for production. So anybody that uses Microsoft Word can use can create the PDF. So are PDFs popular in 2021? You'd think that they aren't, but actually Adobe's VP of Engineering estimates that there's 2.5 trillion PDF stock documents in the world, and it's essentially, if you type in how do I convert to, PDFs essentially overtake major religions, which is I find hysterical. And if you look at the search volume on Google Trends, you'll see that over time, since 2004, there's arguably even more people searching for PDF documents online. So there's a lot of chatter online saying that PDFs are not accessible, and I completely understand if many of you have strong views on this matter. So I'd love to kind of see, your kind of thoughts in the chat later. But do actually PDFs? This is the big question here. Do they have a role on the web? So I think before we answer that, there's a startup called Accessibility that did a survey, and they actually found that even on HTML websites, 98% of navigation menus do not work. Another study here by UsableNet said that 97% of top websites fail the ADA test. So if we frame that with the PDF in mind, the internet is not just about PDFs. Users use Word and other formats like EPUB. Some industries sort of require a PDF almost by kind of the very nature of how they do things, like annual reports for listed businesses, posters that need to be circulated in police stations that need to be emailed, and some of them printed. There's also the publishing experience that some of us may prefer to create PDFs simply because it's easier. And the other, I guess, topic around PDFs is it's hard to test them. So there is obviously tool validation, but it's not really enough. And we'll talk a bit about that later. And obviously PDFs are still popular, so there's no kind of hiding from that. And in stock markets, annual reports are arguably driving the PDF boom. It's probably due to the print heritage. And a lot of the users that we speak to see PDFs as being kind of robust, safe, and unhackable. Even the blind user that I showed you earlier, he saves his own kind of notes and documents as PDFs because he sees it as a very robust format. Certain kind of EU regulated listed companies now must produce their annual reports, not as PDFs, but something called the European Single Electronic Format, which is essentially an XHTML, XML file. So that's an interesting trend that we've spotted. And certain visually impaired users that we spoke to prefer kind of long form PDFs, particularly reading those kind of PDFs, providing that they're accessible on iPads, because if they close down the, their iPad or the app, when they open Apple Books, they come back exactly to the same place that they were on, so they don't have to go through the web browser or Google to find things, and they just find that easier. But many PDFs are completely inaccessible, so I'm just trying to look at all sides of the story here. So in this particular video that you see, the PDF has essentially been sort of scanned, and it's inaccessible because it probably hasn't gone through the OCR conversion. And even when they do go through the OCR conversion, you do tend to get a lot of garbage out of that as well. Obviously, governments are playing a major role here. In the UK, PDFs must be, so if PDFs are used, they need to comply with 2018 accessibility regulations. So that's an interesting one. And in the US, PDFs need to be Section 508 compliant and also accessible, machine readable. So again, they need to be tagged properly. So it's very positive to see these sort of things happen as well. And despite the amazing strides that at least government digital services are making, They were sued literally 2 months ago by a blind woman who was complaining that she's receiving a print format about COVID guidance, and she would rather receive emails or audio CDs because she prefers to get information in an audio format and not in a printed format. So it's quite interesting that even with all the kind of the advancements that governments are making, they still can't seem to get certain things right. So the war on PDFs, I think, is a symptom of a wider problem. Are we in fact obsessing over the wrong issue? There are other issues like inaccessible HTML apps and even inaccessible ebooks. The war should not be on PDFs. The war should not even be a war, but a battle for inclusivity. This can only be done if we collaborate with users with disabilities. So I think that designers and developers need to work with users with disabilities, like blind users and deaf users and people with motor impairments, and just sort of design solutions that work for these audiences. Despite all of this legislation, visually impaired users are still not a priority for many sectors. So only 44% of blind people are employed compared to 77% of people without disabilities. So it shows you that there is a problem. But blind people make a huge contribution to our society, from obviously engineers at Facebook all the way to artists like Stevie Wonder and Olympic athletes who are blind. And obviously what we're seeing now is kind of activists and blind users basically starting to complain, and there's lawsuits now around kind of job application processes on websites that we're seeing more and more and more. So I think it's simply because the barrier for someone blind applying for a job isn't it's just there are big barriers there at the moment on the internet, and that's with HTML websites as well. So this is where I think inclusive design is really, really important. So if everybody lives long enough, they'll experience at least one kind of eye condition in their lifetime. So 2.4% of Americans are blind or have low vision. So we need to be able, as designers and developers and engineers, to understand the disability categories. So obviously there's sight, which is kind of impaired users or no vision, and then there's users that have motor issues over limbs and control, and then there's users with cognitive impairments around learning and language, as well as auditory as well. So to make things better for blind people, society needs to transform on a social, attitudinal, and environmental level. And when we talk about environment, it's not just a user entering a building, easily with a wheelchair. It's also the digital environment, the internet, the World Wide Web as well. At least 2.2 billion people have some sort of vision impairment, and low vision users are continuing to struggle. This is a fight for them, and I want us to be part of the solution, not part of the problem. Assistive technology is also changing. So screen readers and audiobooks are gradually replacing Braille in the UK and the US, to a point where in the UK and the US, less than 10% of blind people now are actually using Braille, which is, again, a revelation. And also, the world of technology is constantly introducing new formats. So like EPUB, for example, where that's kind of replacing the PDF now as the format of choice for ebooks. It's got better connectivity to things like screen readers. It allows users to sort of reflow the text. So it's a really, really interesting development as well. So can accessibility be mainstream? Well, mainstream technology like Alexa has actually really helped visually impaired users, where they can now set reminders, check the weather, get the news, use Internet of Things at home, that's IoT there, manage their calendars and listen to music. I just want to share a video, a quick 1-minute video from the Royal National Institute of Blind People in the UK and Amazon.
Alexa, what's the time? It's 6 a.m. Alexa, what's the weather like right now? Currently, it's light rain.
So there are still limitations around Alexa's capability to read the web and PDFs. Obviously, if you look at this thread from Reddit, it kind of summarizes it. It's not really possible. But what about accessibility kind of benefiting all of us? Does it benefit all of us? So I just wanted to play another video here. Again, very, very quick video that talks about the power of subtitles.
Hello, I've got a riddle for you. What takes 10 seconds, costs nothing, but could help change your child's life forever? Yes, that's it. Just turn on the subtitles. Extraordinary. Research has shown that they can double the chance of a child becoming good at reading. You don't have to tell them you're doing it. They probably won't even notice. It'll work its magic all by it.
So as we've seen in this video from Stephen Fry, it's the power of accessibility is tremendous, and I think this is where you know, the W3C is pushing the PAW guidelines, where essentially what that means is content needs to be perceivable, so available to all of the senses, operable, where users can interact with controls, and that doesn't have to be, you know, button controls. It could be voice controls. Content needs to be understandable, clear, without jargon and confusion. And it also needs to be robust to not only legacy technology, but also future technology like personal assistants and voice as well. So what about the Drupal community? Love this photo. So we recently had Dries coming into our CyberDuck developer town hall, saying that accessibility is at the core of Drupal, and that's something that I love, and I'm so proud to be part of this community. So proud, because I think the reason why Drupal is so popular is because of its emphasis on accessibility. So this is a quote from Dries in 2013. Now, there's a sort of an obvious rallying cry around accessibility from the Drupal community, and nothing gets signed off within the Drupal core without an accessibility review. There's also accessibility reviews of other modules, and obviously Drupal has many built-in features around accessibility that you'll be aware of. Here are some of them. And it's not just HTML. Drupal guidelines also encourage accessibility to other types of documents like PDFs. So I think we can use and should be using methodologies to make the web more accessible. So as I mentioned earlier, governments are driving accessibility forward through inclusive design. Government digital services in the UK are making tremendous strides with the accessibility regulation 2018. It became law, and then recently there's been further developments and further laws as well. But yeah, there's some fantastic developments. One thing that we need to remember, and I think the lawsuit that we saw from the blind person is kind of a reminder, it's not all impairments are equal. There's a large scale, especially around visual impairment, where obviously 20/20 is considered the best vision, and if the vision fits within like a 20/70 range, the users will probably start using magnifying tools, and then anything above 2200 essentially means that users would be probably using screen readers like JAWS or Apple VoiceOver. So it's just something that as designers and developers, we need to remember. This is where I think, you know, inclusive design principles can really help us. I mean, I love this particular one, and you can get, I'll obviously post these slides online later where you can get access to all of this. But you can see here that, you know, there's some really good principles around accessibility and, you know, a web for everyone. At CyberDuck, we also, everything that we do involves a lot of research with users and all types of personas. I really love this quote from Mike as well, where he's saying that in HTML, for example, you can almost bookmark a place on the page. I wasn't even aware of it until Mike told me about it. So it's almost kind of mimicking the bookmark function of what you can do in a PDF, but doing it in an HTML, which is extremely amazing news for accessibility. So thanks again, Mike, for your words of wisdom there. So does all of this mean that PDFs will disappear? Well, some things I think will remain as PDFs. Like if you need to publish or print or save a certificate, I think, you know, what are you going to do? Are you going to save it as an HTML file or as a PDF? Also, if somebody sends you a document to print for a wet signature, would you be inclined to print an HTML file or a PDF? And if you need to capture, let's say, strategic minutes, would you rather, which format would you prefer to save those records, with a view that you need to view them in like 15 years or 20 years? What sort of format would you go for and why? So to create accessible, so clearly I don't think that PDFs are going to disappear, and I think there are some really good guides that allow you to make PDFs more accessible. For example, CyberDuck have created a PDF accessibility checklist that you can download. There's a really good guide for Word docs in particular from the University of Washington. And Adobe provides some really good guidances around using Adobe InDesign. So this is because if you want to create an accessible PDF, you need to do it using the tool. You need to start by doing it using the tool and obviously involve users as well. We also created a PDF audit template on Airtables. If you have hundreds of PDFs that you need to download, feel free to use this free Airtable resource as well that we created. Back to HTML, you know, there's a lot more. I think it's much more mature. So HTML is clearly much more kind of mature when it comes down to inclusive design. It has, like, if you're a designer, Figma provide, you know, accessibility kits that you can use that bake in kind of accessible pattern libraries from the very beginning. What else can we do to make content more accessible? So I think, yeah, this is a really, really good point here, that the average reading age of a sizable proportion of the adult population, so 15%, is similar to an 11-year-old. And I know in the US, you know, you guys are really working hard at making content much more readable. And the Flesch-Kincaid test sort of helps you to almost, and there's some really good tests online that you can put your content in to see how readable it is. But the complex text is a huge barrier. And this is where kind of the Flesch-Kincaid test comes in. You can, I guess the steps that you need to take is shorten your sentences, reduce the number of long words, write for your audience, get rid of all the jargon that you would normally use, and make punctuation your friend, and have a great sort of structure as well. What about sort of AI or in publishing? So Drupal, there's a module in Drupal which we haven't used before, but somebody's pointed it out to us. It allows you to create automatic alt tags using Microsoft Cognitive Services. It's using like AI to basically describe images. Now, we still feel that it's going to need some human intervention and human supervision, but if you have hundreds of images that you need to put into your content, it could, or thousands, it could potentially save you a lot of time. So I just want to quickly talk about testing. Accessibility toolbars are not a substitute for good accessible design, development, research, and testing. Don't rely on a third-party toolbar to make your website accessible. And we still have a long way to go. I mean, when Prince Philip died last week, the National Rail basically made their website grayscale. So there was a massive backfire where, you know, mass media jumped all over this and said, you know, we've lost the plot in the UK that we make a website grayscale and therefore inaccessible. And actually, this gentleman here is saying, you know, hate to be pedantic, but there were already accessibility issues on that website even before it became grayscale. And in fact, it could have remained accessible as a grayscale website. So it's quite an interesting debate on Twitter there if you really want to look into that. And I think that this is a really good principle from Sandy Wasmer, who is a fantastic lady. She's blind herself and used to design things and work in various kind of organizations. But she said, you know, be welcoming, don't discriminate, engage with people, create user experiences and make sure that they have really valuable outcomes. And I think the only way you're going to generate valuable outcomes is taking your HTML or PDFs or ebooks or whatever it is that you're publishing and just testing them with users throughout the entire project lifecycle. So we're out of time now. I just wanted to summarize. Only together we can make the internet a more accessible place. We need to consider the core principles and bake them in. It's horses for courses, so there's no sort of one-size-fit-all approach. PDFs are here to stay, especially around official documents and portability. And I spoke to a number of blind users about this who feel that, when I was preparing for my talk, who feel the PDFs are here to stay and that they can be made more accessible. So we should look at that. I still feel that HTML is generally the better format just for quickly reading information and viewing things online for sure. There's no question about it. And you need to test and employ specialist agencies or bring in less abled users to do those tests for you. And when producing content, consider, you know, AI not only as on the user side, but also from the publishing perspective as well. We do have a booth here at DrupalCon, so we'd love to meet you here. One of my colleagues did a talk yesterday about how you can bake in accessibility throughout the project lifecycle as well. I just wanted to say a couple of thanks to Mike Gifford from Civic Actions for the tips around HTML accessibility, and of course to Sandy Wasmer, and then Steve Green at Test Partners. So thanks a lot. Yeah, obviously I don't know how much more time I have and whether there is an opportunity for questions. So I'll just quickly go into the Q&A. Yeah, in terms of tools for testing the accessibility of PDFs, I mean, I think one of the first places is Acrobat Professional. I think there are a couple of links in the deck as well, and I will, to answer Shannon, I will share the link to the deck. But yeah, to answer your question, Josh, there'll be some. I'll provide some links as well to various tools, but ultimately nothing's going to replace, you know, let's say a visually impaired user who can test the PDF for you. Yes, in terms of making PDFs accessible, there's an anonymous question there. I think it needs to start in whether you're using InDesign or Word. There's a slide in my deck that it's got some great links. We produced a checklist ourselves that you can use. And in terms of Eileen's question, converting PDFs on websites that have valuable backlinks, what is the best practice to convert the PDFs without breaking the backlink? I mean, again, it really does depend. Does it really need to be a PDF? I mean, you know, if it can be an HTML page, it's probably better. If it has to be a PDF for various reasons, then you know, you could potentially use the same link, put an HTML page there, and then offer both an HTML version and a PDF version. That, I mean, you know, what government digital services are saying in the public sector, that it's law now to have an HTML equivalent of every PDF page as well. So I think it's just, that's probably where we're heading in the future. So hopefully I've answered all your questions. I don't know how much more time we have